Betrayal can destroy a person, but what happens when it turns deadly? For one soldier, returning home wasn't the reunion he imagined. His life, built on discipline and sacrifice, was shattered in an instant. What he saw in his bedroom that day changed everything. It was supposed to be his sanctuary. Instead, it became the scene of a crime so shocking that it left an entire community reeling. A husband, a wife, and a stranger, too, would lose their lives that night, and the survivors' actions would raise more questions than answers. To anyone looking from the outside, Sergeant Daniel Brooks seemed to have it all. A decorated soldier with an unblemished record, he was respected for his discipline and unwavering sense of duty. His peers admired him, his superiors trusted him, his life appeared to be a testament to hard work and resilience, a picture of success. Daniel's marriage to Rebecca, his high school sweetheart, was what truly made his life enviable. Rebecca wasn't just beautiful in the traditional sense. Though her radiant smile and striking presence often turned heads, she had a captivating energy that made people feel at ease. She could charm a room full of strangers and leave everyone feeling like they had known her forever. Together, Daniel and Rebecca seemed like the perfect couple. Their relationship was the kind of story people love to tell, young love blossoming into a strong partnership that had weathered life's storms. Their home reflected this carefully curated life. Situated in a quiet suburban neighborhood, it wasn't extravagant, but had all the warmth of a home built with love. The walls were lined with photographs chronicling their years together, candid moments from their wedding day, vacations spent by the sea, and laughter-filled evenings with friends. Visitors often commented on how peaceful and inviting their home felt, as if nothing could disturb the harmony they had created. Yet, beneath this facade, cracks had started to appear. Daniel's career demanded long deployments in distant, often dangerous places. While he was prepared for the physical and emotional toll of military life, nothing could prepare him for the distance it created in his marriage. He was used to being apart from Rebecca, counting the days until he could return. But he believed their bond was strong enough to withstand the strain. Rebecca had always been his rock, her voice a source of comfort during the chaos, her love his constant anchor. For Rebecca, life at home wasn't as picturesque as it seemed. In the early days of their separation, she missed Daniel with an intensity that often brought her to tears. She would pour herself into letters, send him care packages, and count down the days until his return. But as the months turned into years, the loneliness began to settle in. It wasn't just the absence of Daniel's presence, it was the emptiness of the home they had built together. Rebecca tried to fill the void with hobbies and social activities. She joined book clubs, attended yoga classes, and spent time with friends. But as the days turned into endless nights, the loneliness became harder to ignore. It started with small things: longer conversations with acquaintances, innocent flirtations that gave her a fleeting sense of connection. Slowly, she found herself craving attention and validation, things she no longer received from Daniel's distant letters and sporadic phone calls. For Daniel, the thought of Rebecca's love was his guiding light during the darkest moments of his deployments. He carried her picture in his breast pocket, took solace in the memories of her laughter, and believed their love would remain untouched by time and distance. But what he didn't realize was that Rebecca was fighting a battle of her own. As the months went by, Rebecca's loneliness gave way to guilt, but even guilt wasn't enough to stop the choices she began to make. What started as small indiscretions began to spiral into something far more dangerous. She wasn't just keeping secrets from Daniel, she was slowly unraveling the very foundation of their marriage. Daniel, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing back home, continued to pour everything he had into his career and his belief in the life he had built with Rebecca. He dreamed of coming home, surprising her, and rekindling the love that had carried them through so many challenges. But the reality he would walk into would be something he could never have imagined, something that would shatter the very world he thought he knew. What seemed like a perfect life was anything but, and the choices made in the shadows would soon collide with devastating consequences, leaving no one untouched. Daniel's homecoming wasn't planned. His latest deployment had ended early. A surprise return he thought would be the perfect way to rekindle the spark in his marriage. As he turned into the familiar street, The sight of his house brought a wave of nostalgia. It stood there, the same weathered charm that had drawn him and Rebecca to it years ago. But as his car rolled up the driveway, something felt off. The first thing he noticed was the car parked by the curb. Sleek, black, and expensive, a far cry from Rebecca's modest sedan. He frowned, the sight gnawing at his gut. Maybe it was a neighbor's guest, he told himself. But why would they park in front of his house? He cut the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. The stillness of the night wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. Normally the porch light would be on, a beacon welcoming him home. Tonight it was dark. A flicker of unease crept into his mind, but he brushed it off. As he approached the front door, the faint glow of a light inside caught his eye. It wasn't the usual warmth of their living room lamp. This light was different, cooler, harsher, like a bedroom light left on carelessly. His hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment, hesitation rooting him in place. Something about the air felt wrong, like the house itself was holding its breath. Pushing the door open, he was greeted by an eerie silence, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, but rather like it was concealing something. His eyes scanned the living room. Nothing seemed out of place, yet it didn't feel like home. On the coffee table was an empty wine glass, not just any wine glass, one with a bold red lipstick stain on its rim. Rebecca never wore lipstick like that. His heart began to race, the unease morphing into a slow burning dread. He called out, "Rebecca?" But his voice seemed to dissolve into the still air. There was no reply. The hallway stretched before him, the faint light from their bedroom spilling out into the corridor. He moved toward it, each step weighed down by a growing sense of foreboding. As he neared the door, he heard it. A sound that stopped him cold. Laughter. Low, intimate, and unmistakably shared between two people. For a moment, he stood frozen, his mind refusing to believe what his ears were telling him. His hand reached out almost involuntarily, pushing the door open. Inside, the scene unfolded like a nightmare. Rebecca, the woman he had built his life with, was lying in their bed with another man. The man sat up, startled as Rebecca scrambled to cover herself with the sheets. Their faces betrayed the same emotion, guilt. But Daniel wasn't looking at them anymore. His gaze had locked on to something else. The dresser. There, resting atop it, as if placed deliberately, was an envelope. His name was written on it in Rebecca's handwriting, the slanted script painfully familiar. His breath caught as he stepped into the room, ignoring the frantic apologies tumbling from Rebecca's lips. His trembling hands reached for the envelope. Inside was a stack of papers, and with each one he pulled out, the world he thought he knew unraveled further. The first page was a petition for divorce. Rebecca's signature sat at the bottom, clear and confident. But it was the next document that sent his pulse into overdrive. It was a statement for a bank account he didn't recognize. The numbers leapt off the page. Large deposits over months, then withdrawals for expenses he had never seen reflected in their life. Hotel stays, expensive dinners, purchases far beyond what their budget could explain. It was a betrayal that extended beyond the physical. Rebecca hadn't just strayed, she had built an entirely separate life, siphoning away their shared future, piece by piece. "Daniel, I can explain." Rebecca's voice cut through the fog of his thoughts, but he didn't turn to her. His eyes stayed fixed on the papers in his hand, his jaw tightening as he pieced together the depth of her deception. The man in the bed stammered something unintelligible, pulling on his clothes with trembling hands. Daniel didn't look at him either. His focus was razor-sharp now, zeroed in on the cold, calculated betrayal lying in his hands. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was a plan, meticulously executed. And he had been oblivious to it all. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt foreign. Every corner seemed to mock him, whispering the truths he had been too blind to see. And as Daniel stood there, the weight of the revelations crashing down on him, one thought burned in his mind. This isn't over. The moment was electric, charged with a palpable intensity that seemed to make time stand still. The man in the bed, panicked and scrambling to gather his clothes, stumbled over his own feet as he tried to escape. He muttered fragmented apologies, words that Daniel couldn't or wouldn't process. Every fiber of Daniel's being was consumed by the betrayal that surrounded him. Rebecca, too, had risen now, her face a mask of fear and disbelief. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked under the weight of her panic. "Daniel, please, I can explain." "Explain?" Daniel's gaze snapped to her, his eyes burning with an intensity that froze her in place. It wasn't anger, it was something far colder. This wasn't the face of a man who could be reasoned with. The intruder made a desperate dash for the door, but Daniel's military reflexes kicked in. In an instant, he blocked the man's path, his towering frame casting an ominous shadow. The air was thick with unspoken threats. Daniel didn't touch him. Not yet. He simply stood there, a living barrier between the man and freedom. "Who are you?" Daniel's voice was low, controlled, and menacing, a tone that could have silenced a battlefield. The man froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Rebecca's voice broke the silence, shaky and desperate. "Daniel, don't do this. He's no one. Please, just let him go." But Daniel wasn't listening. He didn't need answers. He already knew the truth. It wasn't about what had happened. It was about what it meant. This wasn't just a lapse in judgment or a fleeting mistake. This was calculated, deliberate. His gaze flickered to the dresser. The envelope he'd found earlier felt heavier in his mind now, its contents echoing through his thoughts like a taunt. Divorce papers, a secret bank account, all of it planned while he had been thousands of miles away, believing in the life he thought he had built. And now, here was the final piece of the puzzle. Him. With the suddenness of a thunderclap, Daniel moved. His hand found the edge of the trophy on the dresser, a heavy, gleaming reminder of past triumphs. Before anyone could react, he swung. The sound was sickening, a brutal crack that reverberated through the room. The man crumpled instantly, his body collapsing in a heap at Daniel's feet. Rebecca screamed, the sound raw and primal. She backed away, her hands trembling as they reached for something, anything, to defend herself. "Daniel, stop. Please, you don't understand." Her words were daggers, piercing the fragile shell of control he clung to. He turned to her, the weight of the trophy still in his hand. "Don't understand?" His voice was eerily calm, almost detached. "I understand perfectly, Rebecca. I gave you everything. Everything, and this is what I come home to," she sobbed, shaking her head. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was going to tell you, But her words only fueled the fire. The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in as Daniel's rage spiraled into something unrecognizable. In one swift motion, he advanced toward her. She stumbled, falling back against the bed. "Yanni, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake. We can fix this, please." But Daniel's fury was unstoppable. When it was over, the room fell silent. The once pristine bedroom, filled with memories of their life together, was now a scene of chaos and destruction. Blood pooled on the floor, soaking into the plush carpet that had once been their sanctuary. Daniel stood motionless, the trophy slipping from his fingers and landing with a dull thud. His chest heaved with each ragged breath, his mind a storm of emotions he couldn't control. This was just the beginning. As the adrenaline ebbed from Daniel's system, the room's brutal reality began to sink in. The bedroom, once a sanctuary of their life together, was now a gruesome tableau of rage and betrayal. Blood seeped into the plush carpet, a macabre stain that would forever mar the memories of what this space had once represented. Daniel stood motionless, his knuckles white as they gripped the edge of the dresser, his gaze locked onto the crumpled envelope he had dropped moments ago. For a brief moment, time seemed suspended, as though the very walls of the house were holding their breath, trying to process what had just unfolded within them. Then, something caught his eye. Beneath the bed, a corner of an envelope peeks out. He crouched down, his hands trembling as they reached for it. The envelope was heavier than expected, its weight symbolic of the truths it carried. Inside, he found photographs, receipts, and printed emails. A trail of evidence meticulously collected, as though someone had been documenting their plans in secret. The photographs were the first blow. images of Rebecca with the man he had just killed. They weren't just intimate, they were celebratory, as though they were documenting the triumph of a shared goal. In one picture, Rebecca held a glass of champagne, her smile radiant, while her lover stood beside her, holding an envelope Daniel now realized was filled with cash. The receipts painted a picture of indulgence, expensive dinners, lavish hotel stays, and purchases that far exceeded anything Daniel could have imagined Rebecca affording on her own. But it was the emails that delivered the final, devastating blow. The correspondence was explicit not just in its romantic content, but in its scheming. Rebecca and her lover had been planning something far more sinister than an affair. The emails detailed financial transfers, plans to forge documents, and a chilling conversation about Daniel's life insurance policy. One line stood out like a dagger to his heart. "Once he's gone, we can finally live the life we've dreamed of. No more hiding." Daniel's hands tremble as he reads the line aloud, his voice breaking. Daniel's mind raced, trying to piece together the enormity of the betrayal. This wasn't just about infidelity or greed, this was premeditated. Rebecca and her lover had been planning to eliminate him, to take his life, his money, and everything he had worked so hard to build. Suddenly, the man on the floor wasn't just a lover. He was an accomplice, a co-conspirator who had been poised to execute a deadly plan. And Rebecca? She wasn't a victim in this story. She was the mastermind. In that moment, Daniel understood the gravity of his actions. But he also knew he couldn't trust anyone to understand what had truly happened here. He had acted out of rage, yes, but that rage had been born from betrayal and self-preservation. Sitting at the table, Daniel began to write. His words were deliberate, each stroke of the pen a cathartic release. He confessed to what he had done, but laid out the evidence as well. The photographs, the receipts, the emails. Everything was detailed in his letter. But most importantly, he included a chilling theory. Rebecca and her lover didn't just betray me, they plotted to kill me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. As he sealed the envelope, Daniel's resolve hardened. He knew the consequences of his actions were inevitable. But he also knew that the truth needed to be uncovered. He couldn't undo what had happened, but he could make sure their betrayal. Knocking on the door, Daniel handed the envelope to his stunned neighbor without a word. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The truth was out, but what it would mean for Daniel Brooks was a question no one could yet answer. The courtroom was filled with a suffocating silence as Daniel Brooks sat at the defendant's table. The once proud soldier now found himself a man under siege, not by enemies on the battlefield, but by the justice system and the betrayal of those he had loved and trusted. The prosecution opened with a scathing narrative. Daniel Brooks, a man consumed by rage, had returned home unexpectedly and unleashed his fury upon discovering his wife's infidelity. They painted a picture of a husband who couldn't handle rejection, who killed in a fit of uncontrollable jealousy. Photographs of the crime scene were displayed with calculated precision, eliciting gasps from the jury. But the defense countered with the damning truth Daniel had uncovered. Piece by piece, they revealed the documents found under the bed, the emails outlining a plan to frame Daniel for financial crimes, the fake financial records implicating him, and the devastating divorce papers that would strip him of his reputation and future. The betrayal wasn't limited to an affair. It was a meticulously planned scheme by Rebecca and her lover to destroy Daniel's life and take everything he had worked for. The tension in the courtroom reached a boiling point when Daniel's attorney introduced a forensic expert. The expert testified about Rebecca's lover's gun, found loaded and wiped clean of prints, suggesting a calculated readiness to use it. Was Daniel the perpetrator of a senseless crime, or had he acted in self-defense, believing his life was in immediate danger? Daniel's own testimony was the moment the trial turned. He spoke with raw emotion, recounting how he had returned home early to surprise his wife, only to find her in their marital bed with another man. He described the gut-wrenching moment he discovered the documents that detailed not only their affair, but their elaborate plan to ruin. His voice cracked as he recalled the scene. The mocking laughter from Rebecca's lover when confronted, the look of defiance in Rebecca's eyes as she reached for the envelope, and the split-second decision he made when he saw the man's hand darting toward the gun on the bedside table. "I didn't go there to hurt anyone," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "But at that moment I wasn't looking at my wife and her lover. I was staring into the eyes of two people who had already decided my life was over, one way or another." The courtroom was riveted, the jury hanging on every word. The defense argued that Daniel's actions, while extreme, were not premeditated murder, but the desperate reaction of a man pushed to the brink by betrayal and a legitimate fear for his life. As the trial neared its conclusion, the prosecution attempted to regain control, emphasizing the brutality of the act and questioning whether Daniel's story was merely an attempt to justify the unjustifiable. But the final twist came from an unexpected source: Rebecca's financial records. Investigators uncovered evidence that she and her lover had been funneling money into offshore accounts, further supporting the claim that they had been preparing to frame Daniel while securing their own future. In their closing statements, both sides left the jury with one question: was Daniel a broken man defending himself against a plot to destroy him, or was he a killer who allowed his emotions to consume him? The jury deliberated for hours, the weight of their decision evident in their somber faces. The world waited for their verdict, but one truth was undeniable: Daniel Brooks had exposed a chilling tale of betrayal and greed that no one could have imagined. What do you think? Was Daniel a victim of circumstances, or did he cross a line that can never be justified? If you believe justice should always seek the truth, subscribe to the channel. Only those who think betrayal should go unpunished wouldn't want to subscribe.